Hey, it's Jeremy from Jeremy.net. I am a comic book artist, writer, creator, self-publisher, and I share my creative process here with you online. If you'd like to get 2 additional bonus live streams a month, where we do deep dives into some of the best art books around, you can become a Patreon subscriber for as little as $2 a month. You also get access to an online digital archive where you can read all my comic books, and access to a Patreon exclusive Discord server where we share tips, process, art talk, a place where we can share artwork and give each other feedback, all that and more. Head on over to patreon.com/Jeremy. That's patreon.com/GERIMI. There are higher tiers for higher rewards. However, $2 a month gets you in. If you would like to get a free digital sketchbook, work in progress animated GIFs delivered right to your inbox, blog posts about what I'm reading, what I'm watching, what's inspiring me, you can head on over to newsletter.jeremy.net. That will you can sign up there for my free monthly newsletter. That's newsletter.gerimi.net. And if you would like to purchase physical copies of my comic books or if you read digitally on Kindle, you can go to amazon.jeremy.net. That'll forward you to my Amazon author page. You can pick up books like my first graphic novel, Eye of the Gods. It is a psychological thriller about a man cursed with visions he cannot control. It's a self-contained, done in one story. You can also pick up my most recent project, Morning Star. It tells the story of Lucifer's fall from heaven as a Western. It's an 8-issue series. Volume 1 contains issues 1 through 4. Volume 2 contains issues 5 through 8, the conclusion to the stories. Both have extensive back matter, character sketches, thumbnails, page layouts, photo reference. I basically show you how I put the whole book together. You can check out both those at amazon.jeremy.net. And if you go to the homepage of my my YouTube channel, there's book flip throughs for you guys to check out. Now, on top of that, I want to show you a couple more book recommendations because today we're doing something that I have not talked that much about very often, which is perspective. So one is a book that I bought. Basically, I heard some great reviews on it, and it is as advertised as a basically it's like Scott McCloud's Understanding Comics, except it's for perspective. So it's Perspective for the Comic Book Artist by David Chelsea. The Artcasters have had David Chelsea on as a guest on their live streams before. But this book I've had for, I think, since it came out. And in terms of like the specific challenges to storytelling and angles that comic book artists deal with, this book I think has been one of the best references I've had. And second, this book is it's a thin book. Perspective Made Easy by Ernest Norling. It's not a huge book, but it is very rich, very detailed. I've actually only made it through about half of the book so far in terms of doing the exercises. So I need to come back and revisit this book as well. But we're going to be talking about perspective today, so I wanted to mention it. That book was recommended to me. I took a class at the Animation Guild with Jon Messer, a great perspective artist, great watercolor artist, environmental artist. There's great architectural renderings. Amazing. You know what? I will put a link for him in the description for this video after we are done. But his class taught me a ton of stuff, and I'm going to mention 2 things that he mentioned in the very beginning of class that I think are extremely, like, 2 of the best pieces of advice I ever got about perspective. And I see we're already loading up. Tyler got here early. Good to see you, Tyler. Byron's in the chat. Martin's here. Hey. Good to see you guys. So what we have here is a let me turn the grid off. I don't think I need the grid at this moment. I might turn it back on later. But anyway, well, actually, you know what? This is the grid part of this illustration, or is this a grid that I turned on? Oh, no, it is a grid that I turned on. Anyway, KingzloFitness, viewer, Patreon subscriber. I had posted this piece in our exercise section on our Discord. We all have various things that we're studying and working on, and we just kind of share the exercises that we're working through. And he posted this perspective drawing. canvas. Turn that off for a second. So he posted this perspective drawing in that section. And I looked at it and I'm like, this is an interesting composition in terms of all of these buildings. But I noticed that, there's lots of places where the perspective was kind of off. And I just asked him one basic question, and it was, where's your horizon line? So the first thing, the main thing that Jon Messer taught me was that you got to know where your horizon line is. Everything coming down to perspective is knowing where your horizon line is and establishing, whether it's 1 point, 2 point, 3 point perspective, knowing where your horizon line is and placing your vanishing points. If you know those two things, if you know those two things, your horizon line, your vanishing points, you're going to be okay. You can make a good drawing. And then the second thing was that a lot of people think of perspective as this very dry, difficult mathematical thing. And there is some math in perspective in general. And there is having to work things out. And that, I think, makes people not want to study it because you feel like it inhibits your creativity. But I think in the first or second class, Jon Messer did something that blew my mind, which is that he did a very rough, scribbly block in of a scene, of an environment. I can't remember whether it was a room, an interior, or an exterior. And then what he said was, you don't have to figure out the perspective lines first and then start creating your composition. You can create a composition and then place your horizon line and add the mathematical part. You can correct the drawing. So you can do this fun, compositionally enthusiastic and inspirational drawing that we're used to doing, where you're just creating. You can do that and then put the composition in perspective. And just the idea, it makes complete sense. I do rough sketches and then correct the anatomy and the proportion and add all the details afterwards. It never occurred to me to do the same thing with perspective. But once you know that you can do a rough drawing, you don't have to start out with lines and grids and all of that, and you can come back and add the perspective back in later, that frees you up so much more. It's so much funner. And then it's almost like, it's exactly like correcting your anatomy. It's like you do all the cool, fun stuff, and then you just come and say, oh, wait, no, this should be here, that should be there, let me shift this there. I might need to make this building taller, this one shorter, this one wider. You come in and you do all those adjustments. So I thought that, I just mentioned the horizon line thing to KingzloFitness, and he already jumped back in and started doing a bunch of revisions and corrections to his piece. And, he ran with it, that's all he needed. I thought it would be a fun exercise for me to go through here and show you what I would do if I were taking a perspective drawing that was just loose and just inspirationally, spontaneously. That's the word I was looking for. Spontaneous. A spontaneous drawing, and to go back and correct the perspective on it. So let's see here. Tyler says, I'm curious, Jeremy, what do you think of the new AlexiBot designs I sent your way? I'm just curious about your opinion. You don't need to dedicate another stream to them. I think that they were cool. I saw that you had a Frost version, the Berserker, the one that had the long arms. I forget, and then the original. I forget the exact names you had for them. But I think those are cool designs. I do think that you might want to continue with that silhouette exercise and draw all four of them side by side in silhouette, only because I think that you can push them a little bit more, in the sense of, if you can create one particular part of the silhouette that's consistent along all of them, whether it's the size of the head or the insignia or that he has or something, if you can create one visual element that makes it so you know that all of these are the same character, then that a lot frees you up to make the other ones physically more different. So you've got one version of the AlexiBot who's like slim and athletic, one that is a Hulkbuster, because I think you mentioned having a Hulkbuster type version, one that has multiple arms and is like a weird alien creature, one that, I don't know, just getting as weird as possible. Just the idea of, if he's going to have these different types of bodies, and maybe even thinking about them in terms of, like, for instance, the snow one, might be one that maybe he's got tire treads for feet so he can like track through the snow. Maybe he's got skis for feet. He's like a giant, snowmobile. Point being is that you can make them, if you're going to make them so that they're suits for different environments, why not make them things that will try to think of ways to change each design so it will thrive in whatever environment it's designed for. So it's a great start. Keep going with it. I think you can push them a little bit more. In fact, what you want to do is you want to get right to the point where you're like, okay, these guys don't look like the same character anymore. And then bring it a step back, pull it back. So I just think that you can go further. You can push further. But yeah, they look cool. Yeah, he says they're the Maine, the Frost, the Melee, and the Brawler are their names. Cool. Yeah, I saw those. They look great. Keep at it. So we're going to start, like I mentioned before, about the horizon line. So with this piece, when you look at it, the first thing you can see is that with the way all these horizon lines are moving, with the way that these buildings are all going up or angled up, the horizon line is actually below the picture plane. So if you were a camera, you would be tilted up, looking up at these buildings. The horizon itself would actually be below the picture plane that we're looking at. So in order to do that, there's two reasons, but I took the picture and I shrunk it down. So it's down here in the middle. I may have shrunk it down a little too much. I'll bring it back up a little bit just so you guys will still be able to see what I'm doing. But the other reason why I shrunk it down is because it is generally beneficial to have your horizon line as far to the left and right of your picture plane as possible. And when I say picture plane, I'm going to real quick come in here and just draw a frame around this. That is too thick. Let's bring this back down. So let's say that is our picture plane. And I'm going to draw my horizon line in blue to contrast with the red here. So let's say, just ballparking here, let's say the horizon line is somewhere down here. And I'm actually going to extend it all the way to the edge of the canvas, because we're going to put our vanishing points out here. Make this a nice big dot. VP. VP. We're just going to do 2-point perspective. We're not going to do 3-point. And HL. Horizon line. Be nice if I could spell line. So we've got a horizon line, we've got vanishing points. Now, based on just these two elements, we can go in and start correcting elements, adjusting. That's a better way to say it. We're starting with a spontaneous drawing, a spontaneous sketch, and we're adjusting it now. And actually, I do think I'm going to move the vanishing point that's on the right side. I'm going to move that in a little bit because if these two are exactly the same, I'm looking at this angle right here, and the way that this is set up, the line going this way, the vanishing point is further away, but you can tell because this angle is heading more down and more downward, that the vanishing point on the right side is closer. So I'm going to bring the vanishing point on the right side in a little bit, just to give it a little bit more of a dramatic angle. But generally speaking, you want to keep these vanishing points pretty far away. Like, a lot of times what artists will do, comic book artists, any type of illustrator, is if they're working on a drawing, they will tape an additional 1 or 2 sheets of paper on each side so they can have the horizon line go way outside the picture plane and put them on either side of that. That's another tip for you. When you're working digitally, in this case, we can change our canvas size when we're working digitally. But when you're working on paper, just tape some paper to the side of your illustration. You can have your horizon lines go out as far as you need to properly place your vanishing point. And the reason why I say that is because unless you're doing 1-point perspective, where the vanishing point is inside of the picture plane, you don't want to have your vanishing points like right on the edge. You want to have, if you have one vanishing point in the picture plane, the other vanishing point should be far, far away. I mean, generally, I try to only have a vanishing point in the picture plane if I'm doing 1-point perspective. If I'm doing 2-point, I try to have both of them out to the side. Anyway, so this is a bit of a cheat. Well, it's not really a cheat, but the fact of the matter is that Procreate has a tool where you can draw a line. If you hold, it'll let you move it to wherever you want. So normally I would be doing all of this with a ruler, but instead I'm doing it with, I'm just doing it with Procreate, with the click and hold. Now, I will tell you, I'm already looking at this and I'm like, I can see why I made the picture as small as I did, because I'm looking at this right now. And even with this vanishing point all the way by the edge of the screen, this angle is still too dramatic. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do 2 things. I'm going to take this sketch, I'm going to shrink it down even more, and I'm going to move it to the right. So let's shrink this down some more. We're going to move it to the right, because we just need more space in order for that to not be like a super. And actually, let me bring this closer to the horizon. Bring this down more. I mean, that's another thing. I may have just made the horizon line too far below. Maybe the horizon line is just below the picture plane, or maybe the horizon line is at the base of the picture plane. And I will tell you, these kind of things are more of a pain in the ass to fix when you're working traditional than when you're working digital. Because when you're working digital, I can just shift stuff around. All of a sudden, I've got way more, it's a lot easier to just say, oh, wait, my horizon's in the wrong place. Let me just move it up or down. But also, these are the kind of things, as I mentioned, figuring out your horizon at the very start of a drawing makes these kinds of adjustments much easier. Now I'm already looking at this and I'm saying this plane, that front side of the building is probably a little bit too. It's a little bit too sharp of a plane because it makes the front of the building. I mean, it looks like we're kind of looking at the front of the building and the side of the building at the same time. So it's kind of like I need to make decisions here on how I want to correct this. Yeah, let's just stick with that. Now, I could go 3-point perspective, but I honestly feel like that 3-point perspective is something that I don't particularly use that much. Although, given the angle that that these buildings are at, I probably should put a third perspective point. So I'm just gonna look at about the center of the piece. We'll put a third vanishing point. We're gonna put it way, way up. Because the thing about 3-point perspective is that it's very powerful in terms of how it can really give you, it can really distort the view if you're not careful about how you place everything. That's weird. I'm just going to try and decide if I even want to use 3-point perspective on this. Yeah, we'll go ahead and do it. But see, that's the interesting thing. Like when you're going through and you're transforming a rough sketch, you can decide. You don't have to, you know, do something in 2-point perspective. You can decide. Oh wait, you know what? I think I do want this in 3-point. You got options. Anyway, so now you've got this. You can start sort of dividing the whole scene up into different buildings, different segments. And there is a way, an approach to doing this if you're not going to have a large, if you don't want to have a bunch of large vanishing points off to the side and rework everything. There's a way to do this, a similar process of breaking the image up into different planes, into adding all these vanishing points while just staying within the picture plane. And I will go over that real quick after I finish blocking this in. Bring my points down a little bit more, my brush size down a little bit more. Well, that's a little too small. Now you guys can't see what I'm doing. It's a fine line, literally. But really, the trick here is just going over the buildings as you put them in, and then just saying, "All right, I see where the roof line is and where it changes direction to become, instead of the front to the side, and then just connecting those to their respective vanishing points. And you'll end up getting a building that looks pretty good. Come in here and just reinforce this line, because this line right here is one of those lines where it differs significantly from the sketch. So I just want to make sure I really call that out so I notice where the change is. I'm also going to erase a little bit of, whoa, that's big. Let's bring that down. Right over here, this building does drop in height in his sketch between the building that's in front versus the one that's behind. And I just want to make that a little bit more pronounced, because it is not a tangent per se, but it feels kind of tangenty. So if I make, instead of this corner of the building here and this corner of the building here, if I drop it down like maybe just twice as much, drop it down, I don't know, a couple floors, however much that is, it just gives it a sense of a step down. Like, it really makes it distinctly different. And by the way, I know that when I started sketching this in, I made my vanishing points really big because I'm zoomed in now. But as a tiny sketch, I wanted you guys to see where the vanishing points were. But in actual practice, having really fat vanishing points does not help you, because then, believe it or not, just the fact of having your vanishing point being like this, as opposed to like this, like a little point, when I'm dealing with a sketch that's this small, that difference is noticeable. Like, it's actually making my perspective a little bit more wonky than I would prefer. I mean, ideally, my perspective would not be wonky at all. But yeah, you can just go through and adjust and tweak these buildings. And you see, the main thing is that, like I said, the composition is an interesting composition. All this does is allow you to place the buildings in a manner that puts them in perspective. I'm trying to find that balance between keeping the vanishing point on the screen while zooming in enough that you guys can see what I'm doing. At this point, I'm wondering if I should have done these buildings at a low opacity, or done my brush at a low opacity, just to keep it from, because it is starting to get a little cluttered here. Now, what's interesting is it does seem like as you get to, there's a building in the foreground. If I turn off these guides, that seems like it's actually shifting and slanting towards the viewer. So this is something that I never got far enough in the perspective book to work out the proper perspective for doing it. Jon Messer has shown us that in classes. I don't remember that detail. So I'm going to be honest with you. I'm just going to fake it. I'm going to get the part that comes down. Then when we get to this line, just going to perspective across here. And then I'm just going to try and keep these two lines parallel to each other. So have this one arc this way. So in this case, I'm exaggerating a little bit more simply because it looks like the building is kind of coming out towards us a little bit. If I turn this off again, it's this this building right here in the foreground. It looks like this plane that has windows slightly sketched in. It looks like it's shifting and coming towards the viewer, but it looks like it's not shifting dramatically. It looks like it's just kind of subtle. And what I'm doing is I'm saying if you're going to make that change and not have it look like it's a mistake, then it makes sense to just really go for it. So I'm going for it. Let's see here. Byron says, "Fake it till you make it." Oh yeah, man. That's been the story of my life. All right. Let's see here. And I think the last thing I'm going to do is just put sort of tighten up a couple of things here, and then put another layer on top of it. Just really quickly block in what's in the sketch. Like just go in with a black line and say, all right, no, now this is the revised sketch. And I should do all these lines going to the vanishing point, but at this point I'm close enough to the there's enough lines that I can just there's enough lines that are already perspective lines here that I can just say, all right, I see where this is going. I can just block it in to match those perspective lines. I think I'm going to let this go off to the side a little bit longer because in the sketch, it slopes. Actually, you know what? There's no reason not to do that. It slopes off to the side, but it can just be something where, you know what, that side of the building has an angle to it. Trying to decide how dramatic of an angle feels appropriate and realistic, to be honest. And let's do this since we're doing sloping buildings. Let's put a, well, that might be a bit too much to have all of these sloping faced buildings in the front. Let me just try and decide. That's the thing is in this, let me put one more layer on here. This front region, there's a building in here, but it's not clearly defined what this shape is. So I just need to decide what to do with it. Let's say, let's say we just move the horizon, not move the horizon, but let's just separate this. I should just decide up or down. We'll go down. So let's say down here, which means we can let this building continue down a little bit farther. So making some editorial changes here, but move this over here. Let's have this come up a little bit. So now all I'm doing is I'm just trying to position these buildings for more interesting areas of overlap. All right, I think that's about enough. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to knock the opacity back on this so I can sketch on top of it with these corrections. And in this new layer, let's see here. Let's go ahead and switch to black. Now from here, it's just a matter of blocking in these buildings with the influence of these new guidelines. And again, I am drawing digitally in Procreate. It would be easy to just turn on Procreate's Procreate has a drawing assistant where you can set up perspective lines and it will draw the perspective. Like once you set the perspective lines, everything you draw will be in perspective. So if I just draw a line, undo that, so it's a little off. If I just draw like these lines that are going back into these lines that are heading towards the right vanishing point, it would just correct these lines for me. So I didn't have to be precise about it. But that is a different method. That's using technology to solve the problem, but you're not really working out the perspective. Whereas with this is you actually working out the perspective. So I wanted to do it this way because this is showing you the actual thinking through the problem and how to fix it. But I think if I were doing, if I were just illustrating in Procreate, I would probably just turn on that perspective grid and just block it out that way. Let's see here. Now, I didn't actually work out where this building is going to terminate, so let's Have this come out a little bit farther, and then bring that down. That'll work. Now, as far as this building, real quickly, I'm just going to come in here and say, all right, make a line parallel to that, parallel to the front plane. And now that I've got these, I'm just going to roughly block in a grid of windows. Not super precise, just enough to give a sense that it's a plane coming forward. Actually, I saw a great video on perspective from Ethan Becker's YouTube channel, and he basically showed how he got a job working on Amazon's Invincible by doing a really deep, complicated perspective scene. And all he did was he just found a photo that had the perspective that he wanted, and he worked out where the vanishing points on that photo were. And once he did that, it's like the perspective became the reference for the scene that he wanted to draw. Then he made up his own environment based on those perspective points. But it gave him a much richer, very deep sense of perspective in the illustration because it was based on something that was real life and a real life, pretty complicated horizon. So again, you know, having photo reference, very helpful. Look at this because I put so many damn horizon lines on here. I'm trying to remember what's going to what. And I think honestly, that's probably the hardest part about perspective is when you have a complicated grid like this and you're trying to say, all right, well, what goes where? And then you've got so many horizon, you know, you've got so many lines going to so many well, not so many vanishing points, but you've got all these different guidelines going around and making sure you don't get lost in them. Because it's real easy to get lost. It's real easy to lose perspective. Yeah. You knew that corny joke was going to come at some point, right? I see HJ Mars in the chat. How you doing? Thanks for stopping by. We're doing a little bit of perspective drawing here. Let's see here. Perspective can be tedious sometimes, but I think there's so much to learn. I'm going to put in another plane to the side of this building because I realize I need to just move the front farther along. Because now the front of this building is sort of turning away from the viewer, us. All right, so let me lower the opacity on these other layers. Sketch down. Let's bring this down. All right, so now, yeah, from here you could go in and just block in all of the actual, windows on the building. But it's just taking that rough sketch and then just truing it up, creating, vanishing points for all of the structures that they feel like they're all, before they were all sort of like leaning to a little bit of different vanishing points, or even in the same building, the top might be going to the same, not going to the same vanishing point as the side. Now they're all kind of lined up. And I realize I missed a line right here. Let's put that in. But yeah, you can also come in and let me throw one more layer on top of this. You could also come in with just a neutral gray. Oh, actually, that's an idea. You come in with a, no, let's do it like that. You put this below this layer here. If I were to come in, to be honest, there's probably more gray in here than there is light. So I'm gonna create a square. Oh, gotta move the picture plane up there too. Actually, it'd probably be quicker to just delete, duplicate, fill, and now let me just come in here with the eraser. So I'm separating building from sky, and then I'm going to come in and just hit the front planes of the building with a lighter tone. So really quickly, you can go from a rough sketch to a sketch that's trued up in terms of being in perspective, to actually creating a sense of environment and depth in relatively short time. So you've got that. And then if I just alpha lock this layer, so that now I can only paint where the gray is. Now I can come in here and switch to a lighter gray. Let's go even lighter than that. Now just hit up every surface that's facing towards the front. And now you can see that it's a very simple illustration. But even without having buildings, without having windows and signs and all sorts of other trappings like little, vents and ducts that are on the roof, an antenna and all those little things, even without all of that, you can very quickly, just by having things in perspective and creating a separation between the sky, the buildings, and the direction of the light, you can very quickly transform a scene to make it feel, to give it a sense of depth. I mean, who knows if it's like an animated series with that's moving very quickly and it's like an action scene, this might be all that would be in the background, in color, of course, as opposed to black and white. But also it's another thing in animation is like too much detail can be distracting because you've got things moving. So you might have a background that's super simple because you don't want people looking at the background. You want people looking at the actual things that are moving. And things that are moving have to be simple too. Then there's also the idea of making things like Disney or Ghibli movies where the backgrounds are super lush with very simple characters moving across them, which, I do actually think that's a better, I prefer that approach, but I'm like, shit, there's only so many hours in the day and you're moving on a production schedule. Maybe you can't make every background a super lush background. Maybe sometimes you just got to have flat, simple shapes. Anyway, there you go. Simple building environment. Perspective cleaned up. And 3-point perspective, which I really don't mess with that much. So yeah, that's just a simple way to take a spontaneous sketch and tweak it so that it's in perspective. Now we're almost at an hour here, so I don't know how much time it's going to take, but I'm going to try and quickly show you the other method that I was thinking about. I'm not going to take it to the cleanup phase, but I do want to show you that there's another way to do this if you don't necessarily want to spread out all of that, drawing all of that stuff, having the extra canvas to have your vanishing points way out to the side. And my buddy Carl Altstetter mentions this. This is a variation on the technique of drawing one box, one object in the scene in perspective. And then once you have that in perspective, making the rest of the scene align with it. It's similar to that. I mean, actually, it's the same. It is the exact same method. It's just that when I do it, I try to take advantage of a little trick that I learned. So let's say I'm just starting with this building, the tall building that's on the right-hand side. Let me go back to blue real quick. So let's say that I make this building like this. So the trick is that wherever you put your lines that are going, you put later perspective lines. The spacing between them is going to be the same no matter how far down you go. So for instance, let's say I go about this far down. And usually I try to do it from one edge to the other, but in here, this will work for now. So let's say this line, it goes back in space about that much. So it's going farther, as it goes farther away, it gets, closer together, but they're both heading down towards a perspective line that's low. So the distance, if this distance is X, and this distance over here in the picture plane is Y, what will happen is X will always be the same. So X1 will be here. You make this the same size down, X2, X3, so on and so forth. These lines will always be the same. Now this distance is larger, but if you go Y, this will be Y2, Y1. I mean, really, the first one should be X1, but that's neither here nor there. Okay, then go Y2, Y3, so on and so forth. These should always correspond, meaning that now you can figure out, without having your horizon line placed, you can keep these things in perspective. Now, I just roughed in the measurements here. So in theory, if I were to be careful about keeping these, because you saw me eyeball this. These aren't exactly the same. These aren't exactly the same. But the point being is that this should roughly always be consistent. Like, as long as you keep the measurements of how far away the points X are from point Y hour, that will be consistent. You can build that. Those lines will be perspective lines. You can make whatever building you need to line up with those. Byron in the chat says a simple building took an hour. Yeah, but it took an hour to get to that where it was not just the perspective corrected, but I threw some rendering in there, cleaned up the line work. I'd say that that's not bad because, realistic, because you also got to remember, I was sitting there, just jawing for the first 5-10 minutes. So I'd say it was about 30 to 40 minutes. The point being is that to clean up perspective on a line, I think that's reasonable. Now, also, you can, since these lines are always going to be the same, you can also say, all right, this distance from X to X3, you can also say, all right, that's going to be another same. If you take this, you can do the same thing down here and say, all right, that's about this far. I might have gone a little large. And then do the same thing with this, where this, the Y's, it can be the same as this set of Y's. So as you can see, you can create a perspective grid fairly quickly. And if you just go from the center of this, if you just divide this line in half and you divide this line in half, again, it'll be in perspective. Down here, I can look at the distance from here to the end of the picture plane and from here to the end of the picture plane. Divide that in half. It's going to be in perspective. Quick way to create a perspective grid across your entire scene. And you can do the same thing going off to this side. In fact, I can literally just say, here's an easy way to do it. So I've got this line going from here to here. in theory, that should be the same as this line going from here to here. I can say, what's the center of this line? I can look down here and say, what's the center of this line? And connect. Now this method looks a little bit wonkier. But I think that's because, well, wait, that's coming down like this. Oh, well, that's, again, this is considering if the horizon line is the absolute floor of the picture plane. If the horizon line is on the bottom of the picture plane, then yes, it'll still start getting, closer to even as we get lower. But yeah, you can just come in here and again, just keep dividing these in half. Look at that, that. Divide that in half. Divide this. Divide this. And so, like I said, I had talked about this perspective question with my buddy Carl Altstetter, and he just said, yeah, just draw a box once and then make sure that everything else in the scene aligns with it. That's kind of what we've done here. But yeah, really all you need is to just take one object, one line, one building, and draw a perspective line all the way across to one edge of the scene, and then just start dividing the heights in half, and you can basically create a perspective grid super fast. So, and I know that ironically, Byron says, fair, you win this time. Now notice, I went through all of that with setting up the points, setting up the tiny picture with the extra space on the canvas to have, so you can see all the vanishing points and all the horizons. That was doing the long way and the long math. What I've just shown you here, where I'm just, dividing up spaces and making sure that the lines are in perspective, this is how I tend to do most of my perspective. I didn't show you this first because I wanted to show you how to do the hard work and really work out the perspective first before I showed you the shortcut. Because I think it's important to understand the fundamentals of how to do things the right way, even if you do have tips and tricks. Because if you understand, for instance, it bothered me a little how much the angle of this is versus the angle of this. But then I realized, oh, well, it's still gonna, even if that's really dramatic, if the horizon is down here at the bottom, it's gonna even out. But knowing how to do it the long way will help you in the terms of, if you're doing this shortcut that I just showed you here, it'll help you understand, wait a minute, something isn't right. And you can understand how to fix it or figure out what exactly is the problem. So it's important to know the long way and the right way. But most of the perspective that I do, and I don't do a ton of perspective drawing, but when I do it, I tend to do this second method that I just showed you, where I just took what I spent, a good 20 minutes previously working through and just did that in less than 5 minutes. Just real simple perspective grid. Now, mind you, this isn't a 3-point perspective. Although I could make it 3-point if I were to do this method. You couldn't do it from to edge of the screen to edge of the screen, but what you could do is you could say, all right, if this was going to be 3-point perspective, then I might, from the bottom corner of each side of the picture, I might say, all right, I'm going to have this line going this way and this line going this way. And if I were to do this method where I did the X's and Y's, I would just be doing them on this line instead of doing it on the picture plane. But if I did that, this method still would hold true for doing 3-point perspective. fact, I'm going to put here for 3-point per. That's an E that you can't read. PER. All right, yeah. So that's a really quick rundown of like my basic simple perspective process. And again, I will put Jon Messer's a link to his Instagram or his website or both in the description of this video later so you guys can check it out. He's a great instructor. I'm not sure if he's continually doing classes online or whether he's doing private courses, but he's an amazing artist and an amazing person, incredibly kind, one of the nicest artists I've ever met, one of the nicest human beings I've ever met, but also an amazing teacher, great classes on perspective. He really invigorated and got me excited about perspective in a way that I hadn't been before, because I think like a lot of us, perspective felt like eating your vegetables. It felt like a chore, something that had to be dealt with. But he finds a way to show you how creative you can be with perspective. It doesn't have to stifle your creativity. It can bolster it. Or it can just make your creativity shine better. So again, with that, let's go back to the big cam. And again, a book that he recommended from his class, Perspective Made Easy by Ernest Norling. Got this here. So this one is I still need to finish this book. I've only made it, about halfway through. And when I say halfway through, there's like all sorts of Post-its and stickers in here and notes for me working on the different exercises. So it's got exercises to work through. And then a book that I have completed, Perspective for the Comic Book Artist by David Chelsea. Again, if you Google Artcasters and David Chelsea, you'll find an interview with the author that the Artcasters did. You know what? I'll try to put that link in the description for the video as well. And I am also very aware of Marcos Matthew Mestre's Framed Perspective 1 and 2. I own those books. I just haven't read them yet. But let me put it this way, his Framed Ink book is so amazing that I'm sure that's why I bought the Framed Perspective books. It's simply because the Framed Ink books are so great. The only reason why I didn't mention them or cite them here is only because I haven't read them yet. But I am sure they're fantastic. So that's another option for you guys to look at. Oh, let me go back to my screen, because I also forgot to mention, I'm just trying to mention, because I do a bad job of promoting my own work. My recent prints, the Gorgon Emergence series, are available for purchase now. You can get them in 16 by 20 or 8 by 10. Very, very proud of these. I've got them in 4 different colors. It's the red, the blue, the green. Then my personal favorite, the warm gray. So you can get these pieces at jeremy.net, the old homepage. So definitely, if you're in the mood for some more wall decor, head over there and check those out. I also need to create a posting on Discord and Patreon for the next art book study group, because that will be coming up this Wednesday. We'll be doing that for all our Patreon subscribers. We've been doing a deep dive on Walt Reed's The Figure. It's one of my favorite figure drawing books in terms of the fundamentals of drawing, and we're going to continue going through that. We're going page by page, doing studies from the book. So we'll be continuing that, and that will be Wednesday, 7:30 Pacific Standard Time. And if you guys want to get on there, again, you can become a Patreon subscriber for as little as $2 a month. You will get not only that video, and if you miss it, you can catch the replay. I know you've got an archive of all of the videos. Just 22 videos just from 2022 alone. But there's, I think probably I've got 67, 60, 70 videos at this point. So hundreds of hours of art book study group. We've done some Bridgman studies, some studies from Ken Holtgren's Art of Animal Drawing. So you can check out all of those things at patreon.com/GERIMI. You can also you'll get access to a online archive where you can read my comic books digitally. You will get access to a Patreon exclusive Discord server where, hell, that's where KingzloFitness shared that sketch that we were working on today. And I want to thank him again so much, man, for allowing me to share your artwork online and talk about it, talk about perspective. I thought it was a great teaching moment to kind of show people how I work through correcting those things. So thank you again for that. And thank you for being a patron and Patreon supporter. Now, if you would like to get a free digital sketchbook, if you would like to get work in progress image gifts delivered right to your inbox, blog posts about what I'm reading, what I'm watching, what's inspiring me creatively, you can sign up for my free monthly newsletter at newsletter.jeremy.net. And finally, if you would like to purchase physical copies of my comic books or free digitally on Kindle, you can go to amazon.jeremy.net. They'll forward you to my Amazon author page. You can pick up books like my first graphic novel, Eye of the Gods. It is a psychological thriller about a man cursed with visions he cannot control. It is a done-in-one self-contained graphic novel. You can pick up my most recent project, Morning Star. Tells the story of Lucifer's fall from heaven as a Western. It's an 8-issue series. Volume 1 contains issues 1 through 4. Volume 2 contains issues 5 through 8, the conclusion to the series. Both volumes have extensive back matter, character sketches, thumbnails, script excerpts, photo reference, and more. I basically show you how to put the whole book together. And there are book flip-throughs on the homepage of my YouTube channel. So if you head on over to youtube.com/GERIMI, youtube.com/Jeremy, you can see what's inside those books before you pick them up. All right, guys. Thank you so much. I appreciate the feedback, the company, the comments. Always love hanging out with you guys. That's it for now. Go be creative.